Hello and welcome to this video. Today I decided to make a very simple project after the amount of work I spent on last week's, just to give myself something creative to do, but also not overwork myself with another larger project. So I just went and grabbed my shrink plastic and decided to design two charms with it. And I'm going to really just freehand them, or not much effort putting into it, no pre-sketching, things like that, just freehanding some really cute designs. And I'm actually going to use them to mark some of my USB sticks, because most of my other USB sticks already have a charm, but I have two that I use for picture transfer that I really love to have a charm, because it just makes it easier for me personally to separate out which USB stick is for what. So I decided, some cute animal designs would probably fit best for that. Just very simple, again, freehanded. I did have a little reference picture of an actual llama picture on my phone, and that's what I went with for the first design. Just a really simple llama, and then I started out with my white undertone. Originally I wanted to make it cream color, but then I decided no, I wanted to make it brown, so I really hope that layering the colors works, because I know that both sides, front and back, can look very much so different, especially with this pre-roughened or pre-scratched up shrink foil, because the pigment gets stuck in layers in these nooks and crannies, and sometimes the color really just doesn't translate from back to front. And it does look a bit different in this case for these charms, but it isn't too bad at all, since I didn't press too hard with the first pen. The lines that I tried to make look like fur here still translate through pretty well. And I decided to go with two tones of her, this more maroon color, and then this bit colder brown, but both of them similar enough shades, but hopefully different enough to where it looks like there's a bit of variation in the fur. And then I blend them just a little bit with the same white pencil, because these white pencils usually, except for when they're really pigmented, are meant to blend your pencils and make them look a bit smoother. At least the ones I have mostly do that. And by the way, the color pencils I'm using here, they're Prismacolor brand. I chose these because they were just the ones I had right next to me, honestly. And I know they're really nice and pigmented, and I know that they will translate through really well when the foil shrinks. But yeah, again, just a very simple freehanding design, and just layering some of the shadows on and things like that. You can actually see me use a knife to scratch away the highlights. I found for certain details, especially trying to erase all of the pigment in dark spots, is really hard. So I found that carefully scratching it up with the tip of my X-Acto knife works super well. It does leave a smoother surface, especially if you have to remove darker colors and you have to scratch a bit more. So it may not hold colored pencil really well, but since I'm using acrylic paint pens for the details of the eyes here, it actually worked out super well. But yeah, just a little trick from my side if you ever struggle to get tiny detailed highlights, because sometimes it can be really hard with the texture to avoid the perfect spots for highlight with your colored pencil or marker. So, scratching that off really is a useful way to remove things, because as you can see here, I'm actually using an electric eraser, and you can kind of see in the bits where I erased, the foil becomes a bit more matte, and that is because the erasers always do leave a tiny bit of residue inside the nooks and crannies, and it also means that the more you erase, if you don't rub most of that residue off, it will not hold as much pigment anymore, or not as crisp of a pigment line anymore than it did before you erased. So, all of it has its pros and cons. Again, you can erase, but I also found that most normal erasers that are not electric or kneadable just have a harder time to get all of the pigment out of these little scratches. But yeah, electric eraser and a knife work really well in certain circumstances. And if you don't want to have to erase too much, you can definitely use a sketch, since these shrink plastic fillets are transparent. You can totally like print something else out, lay it onto that and trace the outlines. Now, one thing I haven't really been able to figure it out yet, which I would love to hear some suggestions if you guys have experience, or I would love in the future to experiment with that, is to prevent colors from smudging into each other. Since this is plastic, the pigments basically lay on top, and that means whenever I use like anything but like acrylic pens, or like acrylic paints more or less, actually acrylic pens themselves smudge a decent bit too, but like anything else like markers, colored pencils, the pigment, like it doesn't quite adhere or like stick as well. So I noticed whenever I go over it with another color, even if I try to avoid the edges of like things that already have pigment, it still blends into it a bit and like smudges the details a little bit, which isn't too bad for these like very like, you know, furry animal creatures, where like blending them gives them a softer, more like even fur or feather look. But if I want to in the future design some sharper lined things with multiple colors, I wonder if there's like a good way, or like if it's just, you know, testing out different color pencils, or if there's like just a specific black fine liner or marker or something that works super well with this kind of stuff. Also, I don't know if it's just a problem I'm having with this specific shrink wrap, because, you know, I'm using a really generic Amazon type brand. But yeah, I would be super curious to hear your guys' suggestions in that, and maybe in the future I may make a follow-up video if there's like something to experiment on. If not, then I will likely just use the tricks maybe in a future video at some point. But yeah, as you can see, for the second design I decided the duck, and this one gave me a lot of headache, especially with the beak area. And I tried to shade both of the animals a bit more, but especially with the duck beak, as I mentioned, like I struggled quite a bit more after I erased it so much, because when I added the white highlight, you could see like it isn't really much lighter and the pigment doesn't go down as even anymore as it did before. So yeah, I guess that's like another thing to learn, that you shouldn't really erase that much. You can actually see me like remove a little bit with the knife, and that was just because I wanted to have a bit more control, because I was happy with like the surrounding areas and I didn't want to like have to redo any of the other lines already drawn. Even though again it definitely smooths the material a bit, but I'm wondering if like you purposefully scratch it with a knife a little bit more, if that adds the texture back. Or if you could maybe even use like a sanding stick that has like a tip where you can really like controlled sand away the pigment that you don't want, because then it would roughen the surface again. I wonder if that would actually be a better possibility for the pigment to stick again. And of course, after I finished my designs, I cut everything out and then I added some holes. I couldn't find my singular hole punch, so I struggled a bit with my like normal double hole paper hole punch, because that was really hard to align. For the duck it worked out really well, for the llama not as much, but it still turned out really fine. It's just like a little bit to the side. But yeah, I found the hole punch is way easier to use, because shrink plastic does tend to get a bit more brittle, so I tried before to drill holes manually into shrink plastic and it shattered. So having the holes pre-made before shrinking, always a thing, turns out way neater. But yeah, with that, this project is done. As you can see, I already added those like string type things for, you know, attaching it to my USB stick. I went with like a carabiner for the little llama, because actually that fit in the hole, but because of the little hair tuft on the duck, I had to add a jump ring, which totally worked fine as well. Just means that I cannot change charms as easily, but again, I have enough of these like loop things that it doesn't really matter. Also, the last thing I really should mention is that the sealant I used, or the gloss coat I used, is actually nail polish, just run of the mill. It doesn't work with all pigments and things you add, but I found like with colored pencil, it's usually they're stable enough after shrinking that you can apply some thinner coats. You cannot like move it around a lot because it will definitely dissolve the pigments a little bit and like mix in with them. But for like thinner coats, it definitely works out really nicely, and you don't have to worry about waiting for it to cure properly like you have to do with UV resin. So I find it just sometimes a bit easier to work with than like that or another gloss varnish. But yeah, overall I'm super happy with how these turned out. I think they turned out adorable, especially for me not having any sketch or anything in the beginning. And it was a really easy and relaxing project, like in general. So let me know in the comments down below what you thought of these designs, and let me know if you have any charms on your USB stick that you actually use to discern them. And as always, I hope you have a great day. See you next time. Bye bye!